So I like to tell people the mind, which is the domain of psychiatry, and the brain, which is the domain of neurology and neuropsychology, are one and the same organ and two sides of the same coin. So it is important to recognize ways in which emotional functioning can impact attention and executive functioning. So in depression, the capacity for cognitive functioning significantly decreases, which is well known in clinical research. Psychological difficulties such as anxiety and depression, where we have ruminations or repetitive and preoccupying negative thinking, is part of the symptomology. And these ruminations take up a lot of mental space and therefore can contribute to attentional difficulties and can impair all executive functioning capacities. Moreover, these psychological symptoms, as well as anxious personality features, are associated with negative beliefs about cognitive functioning, which compound the issue, further reducing attention. So targeting emotional difficulties that negatively impact attention and executive functioning also becomes essential for improvement in these cognitive areas. So it's very important to recognize, because it's a positive fact that gives us a lot of hope, that the process of neuroplasticity occurs throughout the lifespan. Neuroplasticity is a very large process and phenomenon. It describes changes in the brain that happen on both a cellular level as well as the organization of brain networks. These changes help us compensate for age-related decline. So it's actually therapeutic to know that there is a built-in capacity for change in brain areas, specifically in the frontal lobe and even the temporal cortex, which is responsible for memory, that helps us preserve our executive functioning and memory abilities throughout the lifespan. So the main principles we follow in CRT are building awareness of patterns of our typical executive dysfunctions, whether or not it's a vulnerability to distraction, procrastination. We focus on what triggers these cognitive issues. We also build awareness for the need to use strategies in moments when an executive error is likely to occur, like predicting there's likely going to be an error in terms of missing an item when we go to the grocery store. So what's the strategy we can put in place to ensure that that doesn't happen? CRT is also stepwise and goal-oriented. So we work on developing goals that are reachable and specific within the time frame of treatment. Moreover, the goals are personalized. They're about modifying strategies that will work for you in your life. So as you know, we all have different problems and different types of strategies that will work for us to enhance executive control. Generalizable means that we gear the treatment to be practical and applicable, which means usable in the environment that you exist in, like school or work. And at the end of treatment, we really want you to be your own neuropsychologist, so that you've gained mastery over what you've learned, so that you can monitor when you are not using a strategy and course correct when you need it. You basically come out of treatment with a new toolkit of strategies that you've developed throughout treatment. So cognitive remediation strategies capitalize on that supervisory control of the frontal lobes. CRT helps to take ourselves off of autopilot and use our metacognition. So what all CRT approaches have in common is something called metacognition, or analyzing thinking about our approach to tasks. And in using metacognitive strategies, we work together to think about your approach to tasks. And once we collaboratively make that approach explicit and deliberate, we use your custom-made metacognitive strategy to help you increase conscious and deliberate self-monitoring of tasks as you're doing them. So by doing this, we essentially develop an inner metacognitive voice or inner script to effectively guide and monitor your goal-oriented behavior. So I'm going to now talk about ketamine. So what does ketamine have to do with cognitive remediation? So I'm going to walk us through very briefly what ketamine basically does to neurocognitive functioning, and then how it can be integrated into cognitive remediation. So the neurochemical mechanisms of action of ketamine that likely induce the antidepressant effect are understood by science. So it acts on glutamate, other proteins that enhance neuroplasticity. However, there's also psychological mechanisms of action of ketamine that have been proposed. And those proposed mechanisms of psychological action of ketamine may include what is called ego loosening or ego dissolution. This is an important feature of the psychedelic experience. This process may occur because of changes in the brain from ketamine in the brain that mediate the sense of self. So what does that mean? So from ketamine and other psychedelics, there are changes to what we call the default mode network. And that default mode network is where that sense of self and our self-reference is located. Ketamine interrupts this network temporarily so that we're less self-conscious and we're less self-referenced. So we actually lose aspects of the self that can narrow our perspective, like who we think we are and all the thoughts and judgments that go along with that. And then we have a much broader perspective on our reality. So what results from this is an increased capacity to see various aspects and solutions to problems. So does that sound familiar when we talk about treatment for executive functioning? It's really designed to help us increase this capacity to see a variety of solutions to problems, cognitive flexibility. So again, ketamine really helps induce what we do for treatment for executive functioning. Also, what results from ketamine is an increase in creativity, being able to make connections that we could not before because we're usually stuck inside of that sense of self, the default mode network, and all the self perspectives that limit making connections. So, this is why some people call the ketamine experience finding yourself by losing yourself because it's still coming from you. It's just losing those boundaries of the default mode network. Ketamine also modulates a variety of neurochemical pathways, some of which can induce neuroplasticity. I think it's important to note that I'm talking about sub-anesthetic doses of ketamine. So not the doses of ketamine they use in the operating room, but the sub-anesthetic doses that we use in psychiatry. And even at those sub-anesthetic doses, ketamine can promote an increase in communication across brain cells that promotes neuroplasticity in several brain areas, including that frontal cortex I was talking about, which is the seat of our executive function. Neuroplasticity in and of itself promotes cognitive functioning. So there is emerging research on the potential of ketamine as actually being pro-cognitive. So beyond the psychiatric uses for ketamine, emerging evidence suggests that ketamine may possess not only neuroprotective, but pro-cognitive effects, which could potentially benefit individuals with cognitive difficulties. So ketamine may be a cognitive enhancer, both through the direct effects on neuroplasticity and through the indirect effects of enhancing mood, which we know can negatively impact cognitive functioning.